Louisa May Alcott would have read in there. You would have had
bookstore.
Nathaniel Hawthorne would read in there. But over the years it's changed hands, and now of course it is a Chipotle. I'll tell you.
Changing history.
Growing up in New York, I've realized New Yorkers, we're all a little different down there, but then I came up here and I realized how normal New Yorkers really are compared. Good Lord. This is a very interesting place, never a dull moment.
So as a meeting house, they didn't want to keep the historic?
No, that's not a meeting, that was a... that was a book.
Okay.
Yeah, and the bookstore closed for years. I mean, I remember it being a almost bookstore. The Boston Globe newspaper had it for years.
Okay.
Then it was a jewelry store for a few years, and then it's been Chipotle for about 7 or 8 years now.
But no desire to renovate it back to its original.
No. See, the thing is about our public buildings, you have to keep the outside always looking as it did, but if you want to rent the space and open your own business, you can, but even then there are certain things that you can and cannot do. But even like if you buy a historical home, what is the paint scheme? You know, there were certain colors and dyes that would still have to be used. If any of you are traveling up north to Salem, one of my favorite places, you'll see a lot of old homes up there in their original colors, because that's what has to be used, and it makes it a little more interesting. A lot of interesting blues and yellows and things that you wouldn't normally see anymore, but you must keep it like that. Yeah. We are actually, well, one place that's been kept as is, the reason we're here is because this is the Old South Meeting House. This was where Ben Franklin was baptized. However, there was a very famous event here. It happened on December 16th, 1773, the Boston Tea Party. This is where it would all begin. Now, tea. We were being highly taxed on tea, and we were not being represented in Parliament. There was also a monopoly on the selling of tea through a company called the East India Trading Company, closely tied to the government. A few days before this event, 3 ships would dock in the harbor filled with tea, and we were to take delivery, and we said no. Send the ships back home, we don't want it. But the government was pressuring us to take it. So now it's the 16th. That night, this building is jam-packed, and Sam Adams, he's up at the pulpit, and he's giving a speech. When all of a sudden he says, "This meeting will do no more for our country." And that was a signal. Because right outside these windows and doors were several men. They were the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians. And they barged through and said, "We're off to dump the tea." Well, this building would empty out. Everyone runs down to the harbor to those ships. They would storm those ships, and it took about 2 hours. But when they were done, they had dumped the entire contents, all that tea, into the harbor, changing the color of the water and killing a lot of fish. But there were some rules afterwards. Number 1, do not take any with you. Not everybody listened. And do not speak of this. Not everybody listened. So word would get out, start spreading down the coast. And other cities hear about what we've done, and they loved the idea. There were all sorts of tea parties. Philadelphia, they had a big one. So now all this revenue is being dumped into the water supplies. King George finally hears about what we did, and he is absolutely incensed. So he sets up a list of laws that we called the Intolerable Acts, punishments. First of all, the harbor is closed, nothing in or out. Those writs of assistance that we spoke of earlier, they're coming back. Then there was the Quartering Act. That stated if a soldier liked the look of your home, he could move in. You got to take care of him. Another law stated if a soldier were accused of a crime here in the colonies, he could be tried for it back in England. And needless to say, after all of this, our supply of tea is pretty much cut off. But you can still get it on the black market. John Hancock would love to sell it to you. But it's at that point in our history when Americans started drinking coffee. It's true. And that is why, more than 200 years later, we have become the most nervous race of people on the face of the earth. And there's a freaking Dunkin' Donuts on every damn corner. And by the way, if you've seen a lot of Dunkins around here, there is a reason. Because Boston is home to Dunkin' Donuts. That's where it all started. So by law, you have to have one every 5 feet. The other 5 feet are reserved for Starbucks. And the reason why we drank tea in those days wasn't necessarily for the caffeine. I mean, it was probably a nice pick-me-up, but they thought tea was medicinal. In those days, if you drank from the spring of water, by that point, you probably got sick. So now the whole idea is, we'll just pour the tea leaves in now, it's okay. Oh, really? Science hadn't gotten there yet, but, you know, they were boiling the water. But they would understand that a long time later on. And one thing about seafood in this city, you know, we rely on our seafood product here. New Englanders love their seafood. And one thing that people love when they come here, lobster. However, if this were 200 years ago, you wouldn't have even have found lobster on a menu because people didn't eat it. It was considered a bottom feeder. Unless you were living on the streets, you never ate a lobster. It was like an insect, a bug. In 1860, at the Charles Street Jail, the inmates were served lobster 7 nights a week until they wrote a letter to the warden saying, you can only give us lobster twice a week. Any more than that, we're gonna tear this place apart. Yes, there was a lobster riot. Lobster was also used, and still is occasionally, as fertilizer. So, bon appetit. And I recommend the chicken. So, we are going to head down this way. We've got 2 more stops, everybody. The Boston Massacre site, and then, of course, Faneuil Hall.